Please, don't eat that.
Someone inside this restaurant just tried to poison a customer.
You're suspended, effective immediately. She did nothing wrong. If you're going to end someone's livelihood, be honest about why.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Edmund Voss, founder and owner of this restaurant.
You tried to poison the owner of this restaurant.
A billionaire walked into his own restaurant wearing clothes that had been torn for 32 years. The manager tried to poison him. And the only person in that entire building who tried to stop it was a black waitress with $19 in her bank account and everything to lose. When she slipped a folded piece of paper into his hand just before he raised his fork, he went completely still. Not from fear, from recognition. That tiny note, no bigger than a matchbook, was about to bring down a corrupt empire from the inside. But what did it say? And why did that one woman risk her entire life to write it for a man she had never met? This is how it started! On the evening of March 14th, a black town car rolled quietly to a stop on West Peachtree Street in Atlanta, Georgia, and idled there for almost 4 minutes before the back door opened. The man who stepped out did not look like someone who owned anything. He was wearing a canvas jacket the color of old motor oil, the kind of jacket that had lived a whole life before it ended up on anyone's back. The elbows were worn through. The collar was fraying at the seam. His jeans were dark with age and stained at the knees, and his boots had seen so many miles the soles were beginning to separate at the toe. He had not shaved in 4 days. His eyes were bloodshot in the deliberate way of a man who had gone without sleep to look like a man who had been without shelter. His name was Edmund Voss, 51 years old, founder and sole owner of the Voss Culinary Group, a privately held hospitality company operating 47 restaurants across 11 states. Net worth, according to the last valuation his accountant had quietly conducted 18 months ago, was slightly north of $2.3 billion. He kept that number in a drawer and never looked at it. What he did look at on this particular Thursday evening was the photograph his operations director had emailed him 48 hours ago. The photograph showed a man being dragged across a marble floor by 2 security guards while a dining room full of well-dressed people watched without expression. The man on the floor was wearing the kind of clothes Edmund was wearing now. His face was pressed sideways against the tile, one cheek flattened, one eye open, and staring up at the chandelier above him with an expression Edmund recognized immediately. He had worn that expression before. A long time ago, in a different city, in a different life. It was the look of a man being reminded that the world had decided he did not belong. The restaurant in the photograph was Thornfield, the Voss Culinary Group's Atlanta flagship, Edmund's own restaurant. His name was on the lease. His signature was on the payroll. His philosophy was etched into the brass plate beside the entrance. Every guest deserves to enter with dignity and leave with a memory they are proud of. He had written those words himself. His deputy, Constance Reyes, stood beside the town car with her arms folded and her jaw tight. She had worked for Edmund for 9 years. She had watched him walk into boardrooms that did not want him and walk out owning the table. She had never seen him do anything quite like this. "You could send in a third-party auditor," she said. "Someone with credentials and a clipboard. Someone who would not get hurt." Edmund adjusted the collar of his jacket. The scar on his left forearm caught the streetlight for a moment, a pale ridge about 4 inches long that he had carried since he was 24 years old. He never talked about it. But Constance had been with him long enough to know that when the scar appeared, the conversation was already over. "No auditor is going to see what I need to see," he said. "They'll see what management wants them to see." Constance nodded slowly. She knew better than to argue further. She had already positioned the legal team in a car 1 block east. She had already confirmed that the emergency line was active. She had already done everything a woman in her position could do to protect a man who had decided he did not want to be protected. "There is one thing," she said as Edmund turned to go. He stopped. The assistant manager, Derek Falk. He has a history. 3 formal complaints in the last 2 years. All 3 were closed internally. No investigation. No follow-up. Human Resources has the files. Edmund was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Pull those files tonight. Have them ready." He crossed the street without looking back. And the town car pulled slowly away, leaving him alone on the sidewalk with the sound of Atlanta traffic and the weight of a 32-year-old memory pressing against the back of his ribs. Inside Thornfield, the floor was running at capacity. 214 covers on a Thursday, crystal stemware catching the warm light from the brass fixtures overhead. A pianist in the corner playing something soft and European. Waitstaff moving between tables with the particular efficiency of people who had learned through long practice to be invisible. A Daisy Merritt was one of them. She had been a server at Thornfield for 3 years and 4 months, which was long enough to know exactly who each person in that restaurant was before they said a single word. The woman at table 11, who always tipped 18%, no matter what. The regular at the bar who ordered the same bourbon every Friday and left his empties arranged in a triangle. The couples who were arguing underneath their politeness. The businessmen who needed to be seen more than they needed to be fed. She read people the way some people read weather. It was not a gift, it was survival. Learned early and never unlearned. A Daisy was 34 years old. She had been supporting her younger sister, Naomi, since their mother died 6 years ago. Naomi was in her 2nd year at Georgia State, studying nursing, and her tuition payment of $6,200 was due in 11 days. A Daisy had 4,800 of it saved. She had been picking up every available shift for the past 6 weeks, eating sandwiches she packed from home, and not sleeping as much as she should. The remaining $1,400 felt like a wall she was running toward with her eyes open, not sure if she would clear it in time. She could not afford to lose this job. That was not a figure of speech. It was a mathematical fact. When the front door opened at 7:19 p.m. and a man in torn clothes walked into the lobby of Thornfield, a Daisy was at the service station refilling a water pitcher. She looked up out of habit. Her first thought was that he was in the wrong place. Her second thought was that something about him was completely wrong for that conclusion. The way he stood. Shoulders square, weight balanced, completely still in the way of a person who had learned to occupy space without apologizing for it. His eyes moved across the room slowly and thoroughly, the way an architect looks at a building. Not admiring it. Assessing it. Those were not the eyes of a man who had been broken. The hostess, a young woman named Brittany, had already positioned herself to block the entrance. Her smile locked in the expression of professional regret that Thornfield staff were trained to deploy in situations like these. The lobby security guard was already moving. Derek Falk appeared from the direction of his office before either of them could speak. Derek was 43. He had been the assistant manager of Thornfield for 5 years, and in those 5 years he had cultivated a reputation for the kind of institutional authority that small-minded people confuse with competence. He wore his suits a half size too small so that the jacket strained across the shoulders. He kept his hair clipped short and his expression constantly hovering somewhere between mild concern and mild contempt. He was the kind of man who used the phrase "our clientele" to mean people who look like me, and had been using it that way for long enough that it had become instinct. He smiled at the disheveled man near the door. It was the smile that preceded a dismissal. "Sir," Derek said, keeping his voice low and pleasantly apologetic, "I think there may have been some confusion. This establishment might not be what you're looking for tonight." The man in the torn jacket reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded stack of bills. He set them on the hostess podium without fanfare. "Table for one," he said. "The reserve cut, however you recommend it." The room around them continued on without noticing. Glasses clinked. The pianist shifted keys. Derek looked at the money. He looked at the man. He was doing calculations that had nothing to do with hospitality. He showed the man to table 16. It was the worst seat in the house. Tucked against the wall, beside the swinging door to the kitchen, it caught a blast of warm air and noise every time a server passed through. The tablecloth was slightly damp from a hurried reset. The lighting there was dim not by design, but because the bulb in the fixture overhead had been 3/4 burned out for 2 weeks, and no one had bothered to replace it. It was the table they used to make people uncomfortable enough to leave on their own. Derek paused beside a daisies on his way back to his office. He tilted his head toward table 16. "Take care of our special guest," he said, with a small private smile that made her skin go cold. She understood immediately. She was being used as part of the performance. You give the humiliated customer the server who looks the most sympathetic. Then, if the customer complains later, you say we gave him our most attentive staff member. Adeze picked up her water pitcher and walked to table 16. The man looked up at her when she set down the glass. His eyes held hers for just a moment, and she felt it again, that wrongness she had noticed from across the room. There was too much in those eyes, too much history, too much calm. She poured the water and walked away. But she kept him in her peripheral vision for the rest of the night. What a Daisy could not know, as she moved between her other tables, was that in the kitchen, something far worse was already in motion. Marcus Webb had been a line cook at Thornfield for 14 months. He was 27, fast with a knife, and good enough to be noticed by the executive chef, who had mentioned to him twice that there might be a sous chef opening in the spring. He kept those conversations in the front of his mind like a light he was walking toward. He also had a wife named Deja, who was 8 months pregnant. He had a car payment of $412 due on the 22nd. He had a hospital pre-registration fee of $750 that needed to be paid before Deja's scheduled delivery date. He was not a man who could afford to walk off a job or fight a manager or stand up for a principal. He knew all of that about himself, and it shamed him. At 8:02 p.m., Derek Falk appeared in the kitchen doorway and waved Marcus to the far end of the prep area, the section that the overhead camera did not cover due to a mounting bracket that had been installed at the wrong angle. Everyone on staff knew about the dead zone. It was an open secret that Derek had always been curiously uninterested in fixing. "The reserve cut for the gentleman at 16, Derek said. His voice was quiet and conversational, the way a man speaks when he is absolutely confident in what he is doing. Marcus already had the cut ready. He had selected it himself, a piece of dry-aged prime rib that he had been genuinely proud to prepare. Derek looked at it and shook his head. "Not that one." Marcus waited. Derek spoke for slightly under 2 minutes. By the end of those 2 minutes, Marcus understood what was being asked of him. There was a cut of beef that had been returned by a customer 2 nights ago, partially eaten, sent back not for quality, but because the customer had ordered the wrong thing. Standard protocol was to discard returned meat. Instead, the piece had been placed in a covered container in the secondary refrigeration unit, then taken out again for an unknown period sometime in the past 24 hours, then returned to the freezer. It was contaminated with a certainty that Marcus, who had his food safety certification, could calculate to the minute. Derek wanted that piece served to the man at table 16. "He won't know the difference," Derek said. "And if he gets sick, who is a man dressed like that going to call? Who is going to take that seriously?" Marcus stared at the cutting board. He could feel his own heartbeat in his fingertips. Derek leaned slightly closer. "You remember the audit paperwork from November? The portion cost discrepancy I adjusted before it went to corporate? The one we agreed would stay between us?" Marcus said nothing. Derek straightened up. "Take care of it," he said, and walked back out. Marcus stood alone in the prep area for 38 seconds. He counted them. He knew he was counting them because he needed to do something. while the two versions of himself argued in a language that had no words. Then Adeze was beside him. She had come through the swinging door on a routine pickup, and now she was standing 2 feet away with a look on her face that told him she had been there long enough. "Marcus," she said quietly, "tell me I misunderstood what I just heard." He could not look at her. "You know what happens if that man eats that meat," she said. He still did not look up. Her voice was even lower now, almost a breath. "And you know what happens to me if I try to stop it." "I know what happens to you, too." He finally looked at her. Her eyes were dark and direct and exhausted in the way of someone who had run out of options long before arriving at this moment. "I have Deja," he said. "I have the baby." "I know," she said. There was a pause in the kitchen that had nothing to do with the noise around them. The fans humming overhead, the clatter of the dishwashing station. Someone calling a pickup on table 4. Neither of them moved. Then Adeze turned and walked back toward the dining room. And Marcus watched her go, and he felt the thing inside him that was supposed to be his better self go quiet in a way that felt permanent. He pulled the contaminated cut from the container. His hands were steady. He hated them for it. The staffed bathroom at Thornfield was the only room in the building without a camera. Adeze had known this since her 3rd week on the job, when Derek had mentioned it with visible irritation, explaining that the owner had refused to allow surveillance in employee restrooms, despite Derek's recommendation. At the time, she had simply filed the information away. Now it was the only fact that mattered. She locked herself inside and stood at the sink for a moment, looking at her own reflection. She thought about Naomi. She thought about the tuition payment. She thought about the $1,400 she still needed and the 11 days she had left to find it. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts in hospital laundry for 20 years and still found the energy, on the last coherent night of her life, to take Adeze's hand and say, "Baby, the moments that define you are not the big ones. They are the small ones nobody is watching. Those are the ones that stay." She tore a small piece from her order pad. The piece was roughly 2 inches square. She found a pen in her apron pocket. She wrote 6 words, "Do not eat." "The food is poisoned." She folded the paper into a square the size of a postage stamp and pressed it flat between her thumb and forefinger. Then she unlocked the door and walked back out into the dining room. Derek was at the host stand, facing away from her. The camera above table 16 was pointed at a 45-degree angle that would show her approach from the left side. She had studied that angle for a year without ever meaning to. It would show her setting down the plate. It would show her hands on the table. It would not show the inside of her palm. She picked up the plate from the pass. Marcus did not look at her. She walked across the dining room, weaving between tables, her face composed into the particular neutrality of a professional who had trained herself out of expression. Table 16 was in front of her. The man in the torn jacket was looking at the menu as though he had all the time in the world. She set the plate before him. She adjusted the silverware, and as she placed the final fork beside the knife, her hand crossed his and she pressed the folded square of paper into his palm, felt his fingers close around it, and kept her eyes on the plate. "Your reserve cut, sir." "Medium rare." She straightened. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she turned and walked away. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of paper unfolding. She did not turn around. At 8:31 p.m., Derek Falk noticed that the man at table 16 had not touched his meal. The plate sat before him, undisturbed, the meat cooling in its own juice. The man was sitting back in his chair with his hands in his lap, looking slowly around the room with the expression of someone conducting a private inventory. Derek felt something he was not accustomed to feeling in his own restaurant. He felt watched. He crossed the dining floor and stopped at table 16 with his warmest managerial concern already assembled on his face. "Is there a problem with the food this evening, sir?" "Perhaps the kitchen can prepare something more to your preference." The man looked up at him. His expression was calm in a way that had no bottom to it. "The atmosphere is perfect," he said. "I am simply taking it all in." Derek laughed softly. Of course. Well, please let us know if there is anything we can do to improve your experience. He walked away. His neck felt warm. Something was wrong. He had been running this floor for 5 years, and he could feel wrongness the ways a sailor feels weather. The man was not afraid, not humiliated, not uncomfortable. He was studying the room. Derek scanned the floor for a daisy. He found her at the service station, her back to him. He studied her for a moment. Then he made his first mistake of the evening. He decided to use her. The woman at table 9 was named Harriet Brentwood. She was wearing a necklace that cost more than a Dieze's monthly rent and had a voice trained by decades of practice to carry precisely far enough. She waved Derek over with the particular gesture of a person accustomed to immediate response. This is simply not acceptable, she said. The presence of that individual at 16. It is ruining the ambiance. Her husband looked at the table. Derek nodded with deep professional sympathy. He crossed back to table 16. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to surrender your table. We have other guests with reservations for this space. The man looked at him. I paid for my meal. I have not finished it. I am prepared to refund your payment in full. I am not interested in a refund. Derek clasped his hands together. Sir, our guests have certain expectations regarding the environment. The man's voice did not rise. It did not need to. What expectation, he said, is being violated by a paying customer sitting quietly at a table he has purchased? The dining room had begun to notice. The pianist was still playing, but conversations at the nearest tables had dropped to murmurs as heads turned toward the corner. Derek straightened his jacket. He looked across the room and found a daisy. He raised his voice just enough to be theatrical. A day's merit, please come here. She set down the water pitcher. She walked to him. Her face gave nothing away. I have received a complaint, Derek said, his volume calibrated for the benefit of the surrounding tables, regarding your interaction with this guest. Multiple witnesses have described your behavior as inappropriate and offensive. I have no choice but to suspend you effective immediately pending a full review. The silence that fell over that corner of the restaurant was the particular silence of a crowd that has just witnessed something and is calculating whether to be troubled by it. Adeze stood in the center of that silence. She thought about Naomi. She thought about the tuition. She thought about the 11 days she had left and the $1,400 she still needed. She thought about the folded piece of paper she had pressed into a stranger's hand, and whether it had been worth this. She opened her mouth. She did not say anything inappropriate, said the man at table 16. His voice was not loud, but it carried. Every head in the surrounding tables turned. He pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. He stood with a stillness that made the space around him feel different. He was still wearing the torn jacket. His boots were still coming apart at the toe. But something in his posture had changed. Or perhaps it had always been that way, and the room was only now receiving it. She brought me water. She placed my order. She was professional. He looked at Derek. If you are going to end someone's livelihood, you should be honest about why. Derek's jaw moved. His eyes went flat in the way that animals go flat before they move. Sir, this is an internal matter. I am going to have to ask you to leave now, or I will have security escort you. Edmund Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached down and removed his left boot. The tables nearest to him recoiled slightly, anticipating an unpleasantness that did not come. Instead, from a thin channel carved into the inner sole, he removed a device no larger than a thumb drive and held it up between 2 fingers. He pressed the side of it once. From outside, a pair of headlights shifted in the parking lot on West Peachtree. 22 seconds later, the front door of Thornfield opened. Constance Reyes walked in. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a leather folder. Behind her came 2 attorneys from Prentice and Hull, both carrying briefcases, and 3 members of Edmund's private security team, all of them in dark suits, with the particular posture of former law enforcement. They moved into the room without urgency, which somehow made them more alarming. Constance stopped in the center of the dining room and addressed the space in a voice that did not require projection. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. I would like to introduce Edmund Voss. He is the founder and sole owner of the Voss Culinary Group, which owns and operates this restaurant and 46 others across the country. The room held its breath. At table 9, Harriet Brentwood set down her wine glass. Derek Falk did not move. His face had gone the color of old paper. Edmund stepped out from behind table 16. Even in the torn jacket, even with 4 days of deliberate neglect on his face, the room recognized something in him. The quality that cannot be taught or purchased, the quality that accumulates over decades of building things with your hands and your mind and your capacity to endure. He looked at the untouched plate on table 16. He looked at Derek. 3 nights ago, he said, a man was dragged out of this room by security. The recording your own cameras captured was sent to my office anonymously. Tonight I came here to understand how that happened. And in the course of this evening, I have learned something considerably worse. He gestured toward the kitchen, where Marcus had appeared in the doorway, pale and still, gripping the frame with both hands. The reserved cut that was served to me tonight was contaminated meat. It had been removed from storage, exposed, and returned to the freezer before being plated and sent to my table at the instruction of this manager, specifically because I was assumed to be without resources or recourse. The room erupted. Diners pushed plates away. A woman at table 4 stood up. Someone at the bar said something that was lost in the noise. Derek raised both hands. This is fabricated. This is completely fabricated. I have given 5 years to this restaurant. I have never in my professional life. The device recorded everything, Constance said. From the moment Mr. Voss entered the building, she opened the leather folder and set 3 documents on the hostess podium without ceremony. In addition to what occurred this evening, our financial review team has spent the past 9 days examining Thornfield's internal records. We have identified a pattern of inventory falsification totaling approximately $63,000 over 22 months, routed through a secondary vendor account created in November of the year before last. Derek's hands dropped. The restaurant was completely silent now. The pianist had stopped. Derek looked around the room. He looked at the guests. He looked at the servers. He looked at Adeyeze, standing alone in the center of the floor, and something in his expression shifted in a way that was neither guilt nor shame, but rather the specific desperation of a man who has just discovered that every exit has been sealed. He turned toward the service corridor. 2 of Edmund's security team moved before he completed the turn. "I will have you arrested," Derek said, as they stopped him. His voice had gone high and strange. "I will sue the company. I will go to the press. You cannot do this to me." Edmund walked toward him slowly. 32 years ago, he said, I was 24 years old and I was sleeping in my car on Moreland Avenue right here in Atlanta because I could not afford $300 for a room deposit. I went to a restaurant 3 blocks from here, not to eat, just to ask if they had any work. The manager had me removed by force. His security guard put me against a wall hard enough to split my forearm on a piece of exposed brick. He said, "Men like you do not belong in places like this." He held up his left arm. The scar ran 4 inches along the inside of the forearm, pale and permanent. I have spent 32 years building something that was supposed to prove him wrong. Not just to him. To every place that ever told someone they did not belong because of how they looked or what they were wearing or how much money they had. He looked at Derek. And you have been running a version of that exact restaurant inside one that belongs to me. Derek said nothing. Whatever he had been prepared to say had gone somewhere unreachable. The police arrived at 9:17 p.m. The Atlanta Police Department processed Derek Falk on 3 charges that evening. Criminal attempt to administer a harmful substance, falsification of business records, and embezzlement. Bond was set at $47,000. He did not post it that night. By 10 p.m., every guest had been asked to leave. Every table received a full refund plus a handwritten apology card that Constance had prepared in the car. The refunds totaled $8,412, paid from Edmund's personal account, not the restaurant fund. By 11:30 p.m., the story had moved from 2 tables of witnesses to 3 Atlanta area news outlets. By 6 a.m. the following morning, it was national. Marcus Webb sat in a chair in the now empty restaurant and told Constance and the legal team everything. He spoke for 41 minutes without stopping. He did not try to minimize what he had done, he said. I knew. I knew the whole time, and I played it anyway because I was afraid of losing what I had. He paused. I lost it anyway. He was referring to something larger than a job. The legal team documented his full account. They documented the November audit discrepancy that Derek had used to keep him compliant. They documented the security camera dead zone that Derek had maintained intentionally. They documented 2 previous incidents, one from 7 months ago and one from 13 months ago, both of which had involved Derek directing kitchen staff to provide substandard food to guests he deemed undesirable, both of which had been reported to the regional operations office by separate employees, and both of which had been closed without investigation by a regional operations director named Gary Holston, who had since been promoted to Senior VP of Domestic Operations. Edmund read the name twice. He looked at Constance. Gary Holston, she said, was aware of the complaints. He closed both tickets himself. Edmund said nothing for a moment. Contact the board, he said. Tonight, the consequences came in 3 layers. The first layer moved fast. Derek Falk was terminated the following morning. Termination is delivered, qua the Constance, to the county jail, where he was awaiting bail proceedings. The falsified vendor account was frozen pending criminal financial review by the Fulton County DA's office. The contaminated meat was collected by the Atlanta Department of Public Health, which launched a formal inspection of Thornfield that concluded 5 days later with a secondary citation for 3 refrigeration protocol violations unrelated to the Derek incident, all of which management had apparently chosen not to address. The second layer took 3 weeks. Gary Holston, Senior VP of Domestic Operations of the Voss Culinary Group, resigned from his position on April 4th, following a board-level review of the 2 suppressed complaints. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. The internal review cited something else. He did not receive a severance package. The board voted on it 6-1. Edmund abstained. A class action inquiry was opened by 2 former Thornfield employees who had heard about the incident and come forward independently with accounts of similar treatment under Derek's management going back to his first year at the restaurant. The Voss legal team did not contest the inquiry. They provided documentation. The third layer took 4 months. On July 22nd, the Voss Culinary Group published a mandatory operational standard across all 47 restaurants titled the Open Door Protocol. The protocol established 3 binding requirements. First, any guest presenting as a paying customer would receive equivalent service regardless of appearance or perceived socioeconomic status. Second, any employee who witnessed or experienced discriminatory treatment by management was guaranteed whistleblower protection, including a confidential reporting line that routed directly to the legal department and not to regional operations. Third, every restaurant would conduct quarterly third-party dignity audits, conducted by assessors posing as ordinary customers. The protocol was covered by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Washington Post, and Bloomberg. A hospitality industry trade publication ran the piece under the headline, "This is what accountability actually looks like." 14 other restaurant groups contacted the Voss Culinary Group to ask if they could use the protocol as a template. Edmund said yes to all of them. Edmund met with Adese Merritt on the afternoon of March 17th. 3 days after the incident, in a temporary office Constance had arranged in the Thornfield private dining room. Adese sat across from him in the same black uniform she had worn that Thursday night. She had been told the meeting was about severance. She had spent 2 of the 3 intervening days calculating what she could afford to cut and for how long. Edmund set a folder on the table between them. "You wrote that note knowing it would cost you your job," he said. "I wrote it knowing it might cost me my job," she said. "I wrote it because not writing it would have cost me something harder to name." He looked at her. "You read people," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I read situations," she said. "People mostly tell you everything you need to know if you pay attention to what they are not saying." He thought about the way she had moved across the dining room that evening, the way she had placed the fork, the way her hand had crossed his with the precise economy of a person who has solved a complex problem in the available space. The folder in front of him contained an offer for the position of general manager of Thornfield, effective upon reopening after renovation. Base salary of $81,000, full benefits including medical for her family. A management development track that led at the 18-month mark to a possible director of hospitality operations role, overseeing the Southeast Corridor. He pushed the folder across to her. "This is not a reward," he said. "I need to be clear about that. This is a job that requires the specific ability to see through surfaces. I am offering it to you because I watched you do that on the worst night this restaurant had in 5 years." He paused. "Whether or not you take it, your legal fees and any employment action against Derek Falk are covered." Daisy looked at the folder. She did not open it. "I have one condition," she said. He waited. "The note," she said. "The piece of paper. I want it framed. I want it on the wall." Edmund was still for a moment. "Where?" he said, "at the entrance. Somewhere everyone sees it when they walk in." He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "All right." She opened the folder. Thornfield reopened on June 3rd. The renovation had taken 11 weeks. The restaurant had been redesigned, not in its architecture, but in its atmosphere. The lighting was warmer. The tables were spaced differently, a detail that sounds minor until you understand that the spacing of tables determines who feels like they belong. The table nearest the kitchen door, table 16, was replaced with a curved banquette that faced the window. It became one of the most requested seats in the house. Near the entrance, in a small shadow box frame made of dark walnut wood, hung a piece of paper roughly 2 inches square. The handwriting on it was cramped and slightly uneven, written by someone whose hands had been shaking. "Do not eat. The food is poisoned." Beneath the frame, a small brass plate carried 2 lines. "March 14th. One small act of courage dismantled a corrupt system and saved a life. Dignity is not a reward. It is a right." 6 months after the incident, Edmund Voss was photographed at the opening of Thornfield's new community table program, a monthly dinner service open to unhoused guests by reservation through 3 Atlanta nonprofit organizations. He is wearing a suit in the photograph. Not because he needs to prove anything, but because the dinner is a formal occasion and he likes to officer formal occasions. He is shaking hands with a man in weather-worn clothes at the entrance, and both of them are laughing. A day's merit is 12 weeks into her role as general manager. She has restructured the performance review system, removing metrics that previously penalized servers for time spent at tables, replacing them with guest return rates and staff retention scores. Turnover at Thornfield has dropped from 41% annually to 19% in the first quarter under her management. She has not had to raise her voice once. Her sister Naomi completed her 2nd year at Georgia State. The tuition payment was made on time. Marcus Webb is no longer at Thornfield. He submitted his resignation on March 18th, one day after giving his full statement to the legal team. He told Constance that he needed to not be in a place where his face reminded people of what he had told to do. Edmund respected that. Marcus and Deeja's daughter was born on April 9th. Her name is June. Edmund sent flowers. 4 months after the incident, Marcus accepted a position as a line cook at a restaurant in Decatur. On his first shift, the head chef pulled him aside and said that she had seen his name in a press article and wanted to know his story. He told her. She listened. Then she said, "That kind of honesty is the hardest thing there is, and it is exactly what this kitchen needs." He has not wasted it. Derek Falk entered a guilty plea to 1 count of falsification of business records and 1 count of criminal attempt, reduced from the original charge set in exchange for full cooperation with the Fulton County financial investigation. His sentence included 2 years of probation, a prohibition from holding any managerial position in the food and beverage industry for 5 years, and a civil judgment of $71,000 payable to the Voss Culinary Group. He gave interviews to no one. He moved back to a town in northern Georgia where he had grown up. His name appeared once more in print, in a brief trade publication mention of the civil judgment, and then not again. Gary Holston consulted an employment attorney about a wrongful termination claim. The attorney reviewed the documentation and told him quietly that he did not recommend proceeding. Gary did not proceed. And at Thornfield, every new staff member on their first orientation day is brought to stand before the shadow box near the entrance. They read the note, they read the plaque, and then the general manager who trains them tells them the story of a Thursday night in March when the most powerful person in the building was sitting in the worst seat in the house, and the least powerful person in the building was the only one willing to tell him the truth. She does not add a moral at the end of the story. She does not need to. She straightens the frame on the wall, takes 1 step back and says, "Now, let me show you how we run this floor." Disclaimer, this story is work of fiction for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.